Seasonic, the heart of your system.
I'm Leo Walder for Kit Guru. It's Leo Says for the first time in absolutely ages. I meant to do one of these before I went off to Computex, didn't get round to it. We've now had E3, so I'm catching up on I don't know how many weeks of stuff. Are you sitting comfortably? This will take 40 minutes. The thing about Computex 2019, it was all about AMD X570 and something about Zen 2. The X570 stuff was frustrating because we saw an awful lot of motherboards and we talked to various people who told us all sorts of stuff we weren't particularly allowed to report on. So at that stage, 16 core for example, we knew damn well it was happening, but it hadn't been announced. The 12 core was, and so on. Then at E3 we had the 16 core and we also have more details about Navi graphics. But never mind the timeline. It's the details of the timeline are irrelevant. Let's worry about where we are now, a couple of weeks before the big 3 weeks before the big launch of Zen 2, Ryzen 3000 and Navi graphics, which now of course have a name of Radeon 5700 or 5700 XT, but Navi will do just as nicely. So Computex was hellish busy. It was just rushing around like absolute crazy for 8 or 9 days. So including the travel, basically a solid 10-day slog. And it was only really afterwards I looked back and thought, blimey, that was busy. We did a huge amount of content. I mean, I say we, I'm talking about myself in front of the camera mostly, Melissa behind the camera mostly, because it was mainly motherboards and she tends to do peripherals. We brought her in front of the camera for the Corsair, Hydro X and also one or two other bits and pieces, but she basically isn't a motherboard person. I am, so I got the gig most of the time. But anytime you saw my mug on camera, she was working away. It was absolutely a double act. And then back at base we had 3 further people from Kit Guru, so there were 5 people working on those videos and pages and photos. We got a huge amount of content done, and yet looking back, how much was there about Nvidia and Intel? And the answer is absolutely not a thing, just nothing. I couldn't get to the Intel keynote. That clashed with some events being held by Gigabyte. They actually had 2 events on the same day. They had a laptop event and then they had a component event. We posted a bunch of content from those events, and they were interesting, they were good, but they ran on for a long time. It meant that the keynote wasn't an option, and I really had to choose. Did I get up and leave the Gigabyte event, or did I go to the keynote? And I suddenly thought, no, I'm at this place. Gigabyte's got a lot of good stuff on. I was looking at both their new OLED laptop and also X570 boards, and they've got some really good X570 boards, albeit I've not seen them running yet. I was looking at the boards, but the features, the 16-phase VRM controller, that looked really good. The range of boards looks really good. The pricing I don't know about because AMD has told the partners not to tell us, but you can guess it's going to be a lot. If that high-end extreme board isn't 600, I'll be surprised. If it's less than £500 in the UK, I'll be amazed. So expensive. But I'm getting ahead of myself. One of the other things that kept me at the Gigabyte event, apart from, politeness, diplomacy, was that Gordon from PC World said, "Do you want to do some videos?" So I did some with him, he did some with us, and that was lovely. And just to make it absolutely crystal clear, I think only one commenter in fairness on Kit Guru. PC World, it's a title in the States. It so happens that many years ago I worked on the British print title, pcworld.co.uk as it became, but the American title, PC World, continues to this day. PCWorld.com is their domain, and Gordon is the boss fella there, and he also does a very good YouTube channel. But it's nothing to do with the British computer store. Indeed, if you look at PC World's Twitter, they say, I can't remember what they say, but geeks, but not the shop. So nothing to do with us. I mean, you look at Gordon, you listen to Gordon, what's he got to do with the British computer store? Absolutely not a thing. Anyway, so Gordon, that was appreciated, and we also bumped into the Hardware Unboxed chaps. We got them to do some video on the very final day on the Friday. Bless them, thank you for doing that, chaps, that was appreciated. And then Gamers Nexus Steve Burke here photobombed me during my Silverstone booth tour. I had actually meant to grab Steve. I mean, I spoke to all these chaps at different times during the week, but I meant to grab Steve to do some video. I arrived at Silverstone and he was just leaving. He was packing up to leave. I mean, he was busy as well. He and the Gamers Nexus team, and there's a team of Gamers Nexus. You see Steve, but there are others there. And he was just leaving. I didn't realise as I was doing my bit to camera that he was behind. Very funny, made Mel shriek with laughter, and that was one of the high points of the week. So all you chaps aforementioned, appreciate it. So, X570 Zen 2. Obviously, the two things are very closely related, and we now know they're happening 7th of July, as is Navi. So, Zen 2, Ryzen 3000, you can't really separate them. Navi graphics, the 5700, I'm personally less interested in that, but it's all happening 7th of July, which is a Sunday, and obviously it's to do with 7th of July, 7 nanometer, there's a 7 thing going on. So, the timing is, in a sense, fairly dreadful, but such is life. The high points, I mean, you will by now, if you care the least about this, you will now have all the details under your belt. The key thing for me with the X570 chipset is that it's designed by AMD rather than by ASMedia. The TDP of it's in the 11 to 15 watts territory, which means that every X570 board that you see, with one exception that we know of, is going to have an active cooler on the chipset. That one exception is the Gigabyte Extreme board, because that thing is clad in heat shielding that removes heat from the chipset. They've done, on the face of it, and we haven't tested it, they've done an extraordinary job with that motherboard. Absolutely extraordinary. Now, apart from praising Gigabyte and patting them on the back, it's also significant because the original boards we saw, the 370s for Ryzen 1000, the first launch, they were all right. I mean, they were basically copy and paste of Intel boards, VRMs and so on. They're all entirely familiar. Memory support on the original Ryzens was fairly awful, which is as much down to the processor as anything, but also down to experience. The refresh, the Ryzen 2000s, the X470, those boards were better, no doubt about it. I've got various boards behind me which are good bits of kit, and the 470 was also interesting because that was when Gigabyte seemed to really stepping up with doing proper VRMs. They were really starting to take it seriously. They obviously recognised it as a point of differentiation with the competition, which was good. And now we've got X570 Ryzen 3000. If you want the full-on Ryzen 3000 experience, Zen 2 PCI Express Gen 4 for your storage and your graphics, you need to go X570. That, I think, is crystal clear. If you don't much care about PCI Express Gen 4, and at the moment I'm on the fence because I haven't really seen it in action, I've seen benchmarks but I haven't seen it in action, then X470. A decent X470 board will do you nicely. All these boards use AM4. 370, 470, 570 use AM4. All the processors use AM4. Some processors have graphics, and the numbering system for the processors and the APUs, they're not in kilter with each other. You need to look at the compatibility of your processor and motherboard to see whether the two things will work together. From what I'm seeing, the newer boards will not necessarily support the older processors, and older APUs in particular, the situation gets very sticky. On the other hand, if you have an older board and you plug in a newer processor, you will almost certainly be absolutely fine. The situation looks to me to be the flip of where you're at with Intel. With Intel, you want a new processor, you need a new motherboard. With AMD, the way I'm seeing it is if you've got a quality X470 board, you're probably good. Now, the thing is, X570, we haven't yet got pricing, but I'm quite certain the pricing is going to be steep. The B series boards, whatever they're going to be called, B550 or whatever, will probably not arrive until next year, Q1 2020. Whether that's for CES or whatever, I don't know. So you're going to have to wait if you want the more budgety boards. And at the moment, we don't know what the deal is going to be with the B series chipsets. What are they going to kill off in the way of features and performance? So that's just an unknown, and as it's going to be 6 months away, it's kind of irrelevant for the moment. The other thing is that because the big thing with X570 is the push to Gen 4 PCI Express, what we're going to see almost certainly is on boards other than the ultra high-end, ultra expensive models such as the MSI X570 Godlike, which is like 600. What we're almost certainly going to see is a PCI Express configuration of 16 plus 4. The thing of 16, 4, 4, 16, 8, 0, or sorry, 8, 8, 0, 16, 4, 4, and so on and so forth, mixing and matching 3 slots. I think we're going to see much less of that because getting PCI Express 4 to behave nicely, the best thing you can do is remove unnecessary slots. And even there, you're likely to have to add in layers of PCB or higher quality PCB. The Godlike MSI was at pains to tell us is an expensive board, not least because the construction is expensive, because it's got multiple graphics slots. So I think we're going to see at X570 one main graphics slot and one add-in slot. And then, of course, we're going to see a whole load of M.2s and such like. We're going to see storage. High-speed storage is a big thing with X570. But the thing is, at the moment, most of us, I think, will say at the moment that high-speed storage works very nicely. Thank you. If you splashed out the cache on an M.2 PCI Express SSD, particularly NVMe, it's fast. Latency is good. It just blazes along. What we want is higher capacity, lower prices. The interface, for most of us, isn't an issue. PCI Express 4 is going to move the interface along. The only controller at the moment is from Phison. We saw the boss of Phison on stage at that Gigabyte component event, and I did a video of the event while I was there. I literally stuck the camera up on a tripod just to record it, just for my future notes, sent it back to base and said to the people back base, have a watch of this, there's some good stuff in there. And then they posted it on YouTube on our channel. And how can I put this vaguely politely? The lady introducing the event, who was they kept coming back to her before she introduced the next speaker, was enthusiastic to a slightly painful degree, and various comments below the video said as much. Now that video has only got about 2,000 views. Nonetheless, if you go to it and skip through, you will find some interesting stuff about motherboards. You will also find some interesting stuff about Phison, where the boss of Phison is talking, and then at the end you'll see some stuff about Gigabyte peripherals, particularly their monitors. Probably going to get this wrong. Battle station monitors? I can't remember. Worth watching. If you could ignore the lady, skip through her parts, and just get to the people talking about stuff, you will find it interesting. And one of the things that's interesting, Phison was saying that they're first out of the gate with their controller for Gen 4 M.2 SSDs. I don't know why they were first to market, but they are. Why it wasn't Samsung, I do not know. The controller's good for 5 gigabytes per second. We saw benchmarks galore of M.2 SSDs. We saw SSDs from Corsair and Gigabyte, and we were told that Colourful had SSDs, and other companies have announced SSDs, and I think they all use the same Phison controller. And at least one other company, ASRock, it was ASRock, they had SSDs, and I said, is that Gigabyte or Corsair? They said, no, they've come from Phison themselves. We deal direct with Phison, so they were using those for their own purposes for testing. So that at the moment is the one. The boss of Phison was saying, he talked to his engineers, said, I want 10% more performance, and they said, how about it, 30%, 35%, 40%, a colossal extra percentage of performance for PCI Express Gen 4. And he said, but this is just the first step. The next controller that's coming, and it's coming end of this year, Q4, very few months away anyway. Let's say Q1 2020 to be on the safe side. And he was saying that's going to have 6.5 gigabytes per second. So this 5 gigabytes, which sounds ungodly fast, that's just the first step. The next one, 6.5, he says, don't see why, he's the boss, he must know. We know that Samsung's going to be doing stuff. This is all promising. In addition, we saw a few manufacturers, I'm going to say Gigabyte and MSI, but might be wrong. They had PCI Express interface cards that looked like graphics cards, and they take 4 M.2 SSDs and they braid them together and give you massive capacity and massive performance. So things are happening in storage that might not necessarily bother you. They might not be of any interest to you. You might not have a use for them. I don't think I do personally. But nonetheless, storage is going somewhere, and this PCI Express Gen 4 is part of that. Having said all that, what I want to see right now is the move beyond 4 terabyte SSDs. I want 8 terabytes at a sensible price, such that SSDs start to seriously challenge hard drives. Gigabyte at Computex, so they had a load of stuff, but what really grabbed my attention, and the same true for everybody else, was they had an Infineon 16-phase VRM controller, which they're showing off on these motherboards. I assume they're going to use that on other board, Intel in the future. There's no reason why they wouldn't. But it's a step from the 8 phases, and then you have to divvy it up and use doublers or whatever. They had a 16-phase controller with 14 true phases of power going to the CPU and 2 going to the SoC, and then they had another model which was like 12 plus 2, so it only used 14 of them, and so on and so forth. And then when you went down the stack, I think they had 3 different makes of VRM hardware controllers. So they had a real genuine product stack. Some of the differentiation for Gigabyte and other makes was a little bit, this one's got this many slots, and now we take one slot out, it's a different board, and they change the heatsink and so on and so forth. But they had a real stack, and that 16-phase Infineon controller, that was a really big deal. By contrast, we saw MSI with its X570 Godlike, and I covered this at the time, still with IR352018 phase, which is not 8 phase. I forget what the numbers are. Is it 4 plus 3 plus 1 or something? It's split. You can't just do literally 8 phases with it. You have to. It has to be 2 groups, and they were calling their Godlike 18 phase, and it is not. It's 7 doubled 14, and then 1 for the SoC quadrupled. Why they bothered doing that, I just simply have no idea. Why they didn't use 1 single phase, maybe 1 doubled. So they were calling it 18 phase, but not really, and the controller's 8 phase. Nonetheless, I'm confident that if MSI has chosen to go down that route, perhaps the Infineon controller wasn't available to them, who knows, perhaps it's purely a money thing. I'm quite certain that board's going to be up to the job, and it's got all manner of features, high quality PCB, multiple layers and so on and so forth, but Gigabyte appears to have stolen a march on them. But when it came to ASRock, a board that did very much stick in my mind, Phantom Gaming ITX TB3. We know that ASRock does things with Mini ITX other people don't do. They seem to have a penchant for it, and they do a really good job. It's the TB3, Thunderbolt 3. They've put Thunderbolt 3 on an AMD board, something I thought was simply not allowed because it's an Intel technology. And they said, yeah, it's no problem. All you had to do was get it certified by the Thunderbolt people, and they didn't give a rat's that it was on AMD. They said they were perfectly happy. I said, so to clarify, make absolutely sure I'm right here, you have to then use Intel software to make the Thunderbolt work. They said, yeah, of course, it's Intel. So your AMD board uses Intel hardware, I suppose in a similar way to using an Intel Gigabit NIC or some such. But that was really surprising, and also that Mini ITX, instead of having the 2 plastic clamps for holding down the cooler, and you clip onto it or whatever you might do, or you take off the 2 plastic bits and replace, it just had 4 holes in the PCB, which was spaced Intel LGA 115X. So you use an Intel cooler. So you take your points behind me at some Corsair cooler, H100, with Intel mounts, and you put it on the AMD board, and it's all good. And I thought, why hasn't anyone else done that? That's blooming genius, that is. Well done, ASRock. Really, really good to see, assuming it works. So the thing with that is crystal clear is that AMD is not the budget option. The Ryzen 5 is going to be 6 core, Ryzen 7 8 core, Ryzen 9 12 16 core. Pricing, it's not extortionate, but it's not cheap and cheerful. Add in an X570 motherboard. I don't know what the cheapest board is going to be, but it's not going to be cheap. It's going to be less expensive. When you get to the B series next year, it'll be a different game. But as things stand, AMD has continued to push on. Now, it has to be said, a large part of this is because AMD, these roadmaps which they were drawing up, some years ago when they first kicked off the whole Zen thing, and it was Jim Keller, wasn't it, who actually was involved at the first stages. When they mapped this out, they knew, in inverted commas, where Intel was going to be. Intel be on 10 nanometer, Intel be at this stage and that stage. I don't know how many cores they thought Intel would have on the desktop, but if there are 8 now, presumably with 10 nanometer they're going to be on 12, more than 8, certainly 10. And they were going to have advanced the technology and so on and so forth, and they were going to have to come up with something to compete with that. Intel hasn't turned up to that particular fight. AMD has moved into this curious position where they are leading the field just across the piece on paper. We haven't seen the processors working yet. So we've seen Cinebench, but that doesn't really matter in this context. So we need to see what Zen 2 can do. This is particularly Matisse. And I personally am feeling confident about it, but I do have an area of reservation. So it's kind of a double thing. So we've got the 12 and the 16 cores. Prices for those are relatively steep, but they're not competing with anything directly. 8 core, we know where we stand with that. The Intel 9900K is just stupidly expensive. But then when they launched it, it's the fastest gaming processor. The 12 and the 16, what price should AMD have chosen? And it's crystal clear they've decided to move up with the prices, which means that the new 8 cores look like they'll be slightly cheaper than existing 8 cores, kind of, but the 12 and the 16 are more, and the whole stack, shifts up. What I don't see, so with the 12 and the 16, the 3900 and the 3950X, I can see that the move to 7 nanometer means that the dies are smaller, the whole chiplet thing, the IOX chip and so on and so forth, and they're able to put more cores in there. That's self-evident. How well it works is a different question, but you can see that the new process means they can get more cores and they can move chips around on the same AM4 socket. With the 8-core, I'm struggling at the moment to see what 7 nanometer is delivering. So if we look specifically at the Ryzen 7 3800X, which is going to be $399 we're told, and we compare it to the Ryzen 7 2700X, at the moment it looks like it's basically like for like. You take out your 2700X, you put in your 3800X, you've got the same number of cores. The question is going to be same TDP, and the TDP is pretty much irrelevant. If it says it's a 105 watt TDP, it's going to draw 140 or so watts under heavy load on auto settings. So we need to see what's actually going on. The question is going to be speeds. Now, I'm going to take it as an article of faith that Zen 2 is going to deliver extra IPC. They're talking, was it 18%? I forget what the number was. So if you take your 2700X, you take your 3800X, if the new 3800X runs at exactly the same speeds, then I would expect it to perform better because it's new and shiny and better IPC, and it should also have considerably faster memory. Memory support with Ryzen 1000, 2000, not great. With Ryzen 2000, we saw G.Skill Sniper X DDR4 3400, and the 36 that was packet was labeled AMD compatible. 3600 was Intel only, didn't want to run on the AMD, so that was the point. 3400 good, 3600 not good. Not sure what the situation is yet till we try it. With Zen 2 Ryzen 3000, I'm feeling confident we're going to go beyond 3400, significantly beyond. I don't need 5000 megahertz memory or anything like that. I just want faster, because 3400 is a bit of a limitation because it's all connected to the Infinity Fabric. If we can get to 3866, happy. 4000 is a nice round number, so even happier. Beyond 4000, I don't think I'm bothered. And the memory needs to also have low latency. So I'm looking for a bump from 3400 maximum to something around the 4000 megahertz memory speed. And then we get the clock speed of the processors. Now, when I did I did the launch review for the Ryzen 2000 2700 and also the Ryzen 5 2600X, and they were brilliant. But what I found there was that overclocking was fairly pointless. Out of the box, dynamically, they work brilliantly. The Precision Boost Overdrive XFR2 features and such like, it just handled it. You just say go, and it went. With Ryzen 3000 Zen 2, I don't know exactly what they're going to call the technologies, and I'm quite sure they're going to essentially merge it all into a technology rather than having different things that are meant to do different things. It's basically going to be dynamic stuff, and I don't doubt it'll be impressive. But at the moment, if you look around, I don't think you'll find any mention of sustained all-core speeds for any of the Zen 2 processors that are due to launch in a few weeks' time. Now, I'm not surprised we haven't had official confirmation, but I'm surprised at the moment it's so quiet on that subject, because that's the big thing. So if the Ryzen 7 2700X 8-core could do, it was a weird number like 4025 gigahertz, call it 405 gigahertz on a good day, all cores in something like Blender. And you could manually overclock to 4.2 gigahertz, which knackered the dynamic thing and really hurt power and so on. So that's the range you're in, 405 to 4.2. If the new 3800X will run all cores at 4.2 gigahertz and you've got better IPC and better memory, it will be better. I'm quite sure of that. But there were all these rumours, weren't there, about 5 gigahertz. Now, I know rumours are just rumours. Stuff you read on Reddit doesn't mean a damn. But I want to be somewhere closer to that on this 8-core. This is an 8-core part. The 2700X is an 8-core part. This is now 7 nanometer. Where's that extra speed? I'm not the least bit surprised the 12 and 16 cores appear to have no chance of getting to 5 gigahertz. I mean, perhaps I'll come up with some super duper Lisa Su version that is all the best chiplets in the world that can do it, and that would be really impressive, albeit the power draw will probably be quite unpleasant. But the 8-core part, the mainstream part, That part I wanted to see doing something closer to 5. I'd have been happy with 4.5 gigahertz, and that would be quite a significant step on from 405. So that would be 10%, wouldn't it? I would like to see that. So that for me is going to be a large part of how successful this 7nm Zen 2 is. If the 8 core can run something akin to 4.5 gigahertz all cores, I'll be very happy. But judging by the boost speeds we've seen, the maximum boost speeds, it ain't going to do that. If that new 8 core part can approach 4.5 gigahertz, I think I'm going to be deeply impressed by the new technology. If it's 4.2 gigahertz and then we've got a bit of a speed bump there, we've got better memory support, we've got better IPC, then it's not going to be a compelling argument for me. It still leaves the other models, the 12 and the 16 cores. Obviously the 16 cores not coming for a while, but it's going to say I've got a X470 with a Ryzen 7 2700X, here's this new stuff, do I want to upgrade? And the answer would be maybe, as opposed to hell yes, I want the new shiny stuff. And I must confess at this stage, in the couple of weeks before the launch, I thought I'd be more buoyed up and more, I mean, I am keen to see it in action, don't get me wrong, but I thought I'd be champing at the bit. Information has been pushed at us in a gentle flow for, well, since CES, since before CES, but CES and then Computex and then E3 for sure. And I want to see it. But right now, I need reassurance. That would be the best way of describing it. The big boy EPYC Rome, which is obviously a server chip, therefore no direct interest to me personally. Speeds for that part at the moment, the reports seem to be really low. So there was 32 core part with a base clock 1.7 gigahertz and a boost speed 2.4 gigahertz, which is like, okay, that's a lot of cores in that part, but even so, that's slow. 64 core Rome reports of base clock 1.4 gigahertz boosting to 2.2 gigahertz, also very slow. Colossal number of cores in a single processor socket. Those presumably are engineering parts, but the rumors are that those are engineering parts that are quite close to launch. So what are you looking at there with EPYC Rome? 3 gigahertz? People after all were hoping 3.5 or even 4 gigahertz, which would be epic, truly impressive. So those numbers for EPYC, and they are thin on the ground, those seem low. If those numbers are low, Zen 2 is obviously a subset of that, but you know that the EPYC's got the really good chiplets. EPYC has to have the best chiplets, no shadow of a doubt. When you get down to the desktop territory, and particularly the 8 core and the 6 core, I'm assuming those are inferior chiplets. Those maybe not quite the worst chiplets, but where are the worst chiplets going? The ones that work correctly but require a bit more juice to make them run or don't go particularly fast. I'm assuming the 6 and the 8 cores, those mainstream products, are the worst silicon that's coming out of a TSMC. So if EPYC is the best and those 6 and 8 cores are the worst, I need reassurance. I don't, however, need quite as much reassurance as I imagine Intel customers require. We read relatively recently, I mean, I'm saying this before Computex, Intel Cascade Lake-AP, dual dies on a single socket, so some colossal 5,000 plus pin socket, but basically it's 2 processors in one package. This is obviously to compete with the up to 64 core EPYC, so you take 2 28 cores, you put them together, and these are figures that came from Charlie, it's semi-accurate. 2 32 core SKUs, 250 watt TDP, a 48 core model 350 watts, and then the all-out monster 56 core rated at 400 watts. Now apparently Intel can't get on to make motherboards for those because the sales are going to be absolutely negligible, so they are apparently selling them as a box, motherboard, processor, box, the whole thing, a unit. Here you go, sir, have this thing. As to whether Cascade Lake-AP will ever actually be a thing or whether it's a paper product, goodness alone knows, but that is seemingly the response to EPYC Rome. So while I'm being a bit down on the speeds I'm seeing about EPYC Rome, quite clearly it's having an impact. EPYC Rome is going to be a major deal. It's going to make huge amounts of money for AMD, but the details about speeds, I cannot wait to get the true facts about how fast those chips are running. And after we've done processors, we moved on to graphics. So E3 was very soon after Computex, and we learned that Navi was going to launch as Radeon 5700 XT, costing $449, and Radeon 5700 at $379. There's also a black and gold 5700 XT 50th anniversary, which will apparently sell for $499, direct from AMD's own store in that Nvidia style. And it looks all right. The rumours were way back were the thinking way back rather was, if AMD can compete at the highest end with RTX 2080, then fair enough. In the same way as Vega had to compete with the GTX 1080 and didn't. And now we've got management of expectations, which is if the 5700 XT can compete with RTX 2070, that'll be all right. Which it will. I mean, that's a decent graphics card, but that pricing looks steep. Now, under the hood, they've changed stuff. There's now RDNA architecture, which is an update to GCN. The snag here is that every games console that we care about runs on AMD hardware now. GCN is baked into I don't know how many million devices. So if new games start coming out that are RDNA and just ignore GCN, that would be horrendous. It couldn't happen. So this is the first step towards RDNA. And obviously it's 7 nanometer and it's GDDR6. I'm not going to say that Navi looks at the moment like it's a sort of a trial product, but it doesn't look like it's going to change the world. It's PCI Express 4, but that doesn't seem to make the blindest bit of difference. I don't think anybody's claimed that the RTX 2070 was suffering from an interface that was holding it back. So if we put that thought to one side, Navi's coming, it's got a name, it's got a price. We need to see it in action, but right now, immediate gut reaction to it is too expensive. If it was cheaper, great, but AMD clearly is not competing on price. AMD is not the budget option. If you want to buy a 5700, you'll pay for the privilege. AMD does not want to give stuff away for free, and fair enough, I cannot blame them. Nvidia has responded, not in quite such an absurd way as those Intel dual processors on the single socket. Nvidia Super. Now, we had a teaser about Super before Computex and didn't know what to make of it. Just had no idea, and during Computex didn't hear a thing. And Igor Valasek, Tom's Hardware Germany, as was, it's now his own personal website, has got some, it seems, completely solid information, which is that Nvidia is going to update RTX 2060, 70 and 80 with new super versions, which will have more shaders, more CUDA cores than the existing models, and also faster memory, and that's all good stuff. And then they're going to put the super models in at the prices of the existing models. So the RTX 2080 Super will replace the RTX 2080. The RTX 2080 will go down in price. The RTX 2060 will continue to use TU106. The RTX 2080 will continue using TU104. RTX 2070, which is the one that's of interest because that's the area where we think Navi is going to be competing. The regular RTX 2070 uses TU106. The new Super is going to come in using TU104. That is the territory where Navi is going to be competing. So the precise details of this and the precise pricing makes a big deal. I was looking around for pricing to get an idea where we might be talking. 2060 we seem to be looking at £300 here in the UK. 2070 $450, 2080 $650. So if we're looking at $450 for the 2070 Super, and call it 400, 399, picking a number out of the air for the regular 2070, that would seem to me to kill Navi on arrival. There's nothing, of course, to prevent AMD from amending things, but RTX 2070 and 2070 Super in particular, that is going to be a white-hot area of competition, and that's exactly what we, the punters, require, because Nvidia could do what the heck it liked while AMD was just sitting back doing nothing. And I mean, that's unfair to AMD. I mean, they weren't sitting back idle doing nothing. They were attempting to compete and failing. And here we are now, the 5700, and it looks to me as though when the 5700 launches, it's going to be perfectly okay, but too expensive. And of course, price can be adjusted, whereas if the technology is rubbish, they can't do anything about that. So we need to see what happens at launch, but it's only a few weeks away, and I'm looking forward to seeing reviews of that. I'm also looking forward to seeing the RTX 2070 Super in action, because that should be interesting. Is that all? No, it's not all. In August, we have the Hot Chips conference. No doubt they're going to go into deeper detail about Zen 2, and by that stage people should have questions, and such that when AMD gives deep dive white papers, it should make more sense to us. We should also hopefully hear about Intel Cascade Lake, and we should hear about AMD Threadripper. Now, Threadripper vanished from the AMD roadmaps a few months ago, and the thought was, well, have they killed it? I mean, they might have done. It turns out not so much killed it as it just wasn't an object of focus. They took it away from the roadmaps. So Threadripper 3000 is obviously going to use Zen 2. It's going to use an input-output chip. You can either double the desktop, or you can go as far as EPYC. Now, at the moment, we've got Threadripper 2000 goes up to 32 core in the WX 2432 core. The biggest problem for those parts is not the processor per se, it's that Windows doesn't seem to know what the heck to do with it. Linux users appear to be absolutely fine with the processors, Windows not. We've just had an update to Windows 1903. I think I updated my own PC yesterday, and we are told that that's going to help AMD. What exactly is going to come out of that, we do not yet know, but which version of Windows you test on and what you're doing, I'm sure is going to make a big difference to test results over the coming weeks and months. So Windows may or may not now be better for Threadripper, we have to hope so. But let's ask ourselves, if in Q3 AMD launches Threadripper 3000 with, let's say, up to 48 cores, which would be sort of the next step, that'd be 8 times 6 per CCX, and a speed of, let's say, 4 gigahertz, well, that would be a huge step on, provided Windows knows what the heck to do with it. That'd be a huge step on from the current 32 core. And then the next step on would be a 64 core, which would be a junior Rome, in the same way the current Threadripper is a junior EPYC, and there we go. Quite what you're going to do with 48 cores and 64 cores on the desktop in a workstation, I cannot begin to imagine. Why you wouldn't at that stage say, no, I need actually a workstation with an EPYC in it, and what the heck, I don't know. Also, I can't begin to think what the pricing might be for those parts. I can see that they would make the Intel high-end desktop parts look just pointless. It's the only way I can describe it. It could simply be that even the threat that AMD might do this just means that high-end desktop, which came along kind of out of nowhere, just ceases to even be a thing. If you can have 12 and 16 cores on your AM4 socket, and as and when Intel finally sorts out 10 nanometer, however many cores you get on whatever the socket then is, where you go, Threadripper is one thing, but Intel high-end desktop, that's looking just grisly. It would be entirely reasonable to think the 28-core Intel Xeon W is just dead in the water, and we saw it again at Computex. Various people had water cooling solutions for motherboards, but is that part ever actually going to go on sale? I don't know. I don't know how many of them actually exist, but it just looks like a show special to me. The thing is, Threadripper, if we have the 16-core Ryzen, well, we will have the 16-core Ryzen 9, I mean, that's undeniable. At the moment, you've got 12 and 16 core Threadrippers, obviously have more PCI Express than the Ryzen desktop parts. Do you continue with those Threadripper parts and you're saying, yes, it's this great big socket, quad channel memory, but loads of PCI Express? Do they sit alongside the AM4 12 and 16 cores? Possibly. But the feeling is that, no, you'd kill the 12 core, and then you've got the 16 core Threadripper, that's the big boy with more PCI Express, or do you kill that as well? And do you say, we've got 24 core, 32 core now, they got loads of PCI Express, so you hang on to either 24 and 32 or just the 32, and then you bring out a new 3rd gen 48 core, possibly 64 core. Threadripper potentially becomes a stack of, and I say stack, of 2, 3 or 4 parts. And they're all quite different to each other in the sense of the motherboard that can support that part over there, the 48 core. It's way overkill for this one down here, this little baby tiddler. In terms of money and memory support and PCI Express and VRMs and all the rest of it, you almost end up with a specific motherboard for this 1 or 2 processors. It sounds to me like a very strange situation. I mean, behind me I've got X309 boards. I've got boards that can run the latest processors, and I've got boards that not really. Then you step on to the next one, the Ryzen 3000s with 48 cores. I'm sure the boards behind me that are doing a perfectly decent job are going to go, ooh, that's different. And there have been rumours about moving on to an X599 platform for Threadripper. And X599, if it exists, if it happens, how many models of Threadripper will that support? How many will exist? 2, 3? I mean, it seems like a very strange thing. It's not to say it won't happen, it just confuses the heck out of me. Or it could simply be AMD's way of saying, yes, we don't expect to sell many of them, but we killed Intel high-end desktop. We did that because we've just got so much more, in which case, fair enough. But I'm going to close with this positive thought about Intel, and I know that's not necessarily a popular position, which is this. Apple has their new high-end Mac Pros, and it also has iMac Pros. They are powered by Intel. Intel is across every laptop you've ever heard of, and those Apple products, they run on Intel. It's really tempting to say that 10 nanometer has absolutely kicked Intel all around the park. Nonetheless, Intel continues to be hugely successful. So AMD, they've had a good couple of years catching up to where Intel's at because Intel's just stalled. Zen 2 looks highly promising. Navi graphics, to my mind, not so. X570 looks really good. The partners are clearly confident in what AMD is doing. It's going to be AMD's certainly 6 months and probably year. The question for me is, how fast do those Zen 2 processors run? I cannot wait to see the answer to that particular question. It matters, and it matters a lot. Particularly the 8-core, the mainstream part. I want to see how well that behaves. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell button, subscribe, return to Kit Guru. We publish videos regularly. I'm Leo Wood for Kit Guru. This is Leo Says.